Rabbi Manis Friedman, hello. Thank God it's Tuesday, but it is a very heavy time, and we are all having a very, very heavy heart at this very difficult time. We're trying to make sense of what has happened last Thursday on the holiest day, in the holiest place, to the holiest people. What is the message? Because obviously nothing happens without a reason. So how should we be able to deal with this tragedy? What are we supposed to take away from it?
For everything, there is a time and a season. Before we start taking away from, and before we try to explain or rationalize or whatever it is, first we need time to grieve. It's a little premature when people start giving their opinions as to why it happened, how it happened, and so on. This is not yet. I mean, it is so painful that it deserves at least a week or two of just pain before we start trying to heal. The modern approach, is that the minute the pain happens, you have to start healing and easing the pain. No, first you have to feel it, you have to go through it, you have to grieve. That's the way of the world. But one thing we do have to keep in mind: painful things are mysterious. Why would this happen? Why would God allow it? And so on. This should not be taken as a definition of life or a test of life. We've been talking for over a year. The world is getting better. It is. This tragedy is not a contradiction, because tragedy is not immoral. Getting better, the world getting better, means it's becoming more moral, more goodness on the part of people, that there is still pain, there is still death, there is still tragedy. Yes, the world is still the world we are used to. But the good news is that we're becoming better people. That hasn't changed. In fact, if you've been keeping up with the news in Israel, in the last couple of months, there has been some pretty serious, painful friction between the non-observant or the non-religious population and the religious population. Some nasty stuff, I have to admit. The result of this tragedy on the human level is that people have become better. Nobody is insensitive to this. Nobody is saying, oh, they're the religious people, they're crazy, they're reckless, Nobody is saying that. The country is mourning a national tragedy. The people are united. Hopefully it'll last this time. Because every time there's a tragedy, we unite. Hopefully this time the unity will last beyond the tragedy. So again, the world is getting better, even in the face of tragedy. So not to think that because a tragedy happens, the world is getting worse. It's not. The mystery of why there is still suffering and why there is still pain, that's an old question. And only God can answer that. But we, on our part, we are becoming better. It's beautiful to see how the country has come together.
Rabbi Friedman, I'm sorry to put a damper on this, but looking at the Facebook, unfortunately, a lot of people have treated this not in a good way. And there was some comments about people being fanatic, about fanatical gatherings, about the fact that it's inevitable, ridiculous stuff like that. But unfortunately, it did appear on Facebook. So that, of course, makes me question how much better are we getting?
Don't believe what you see on Facebook. Yes, there will always be these chronic complainers and kvetchers. I'm sure there's a handful of them. But if you look at the news in Israel, where the problem of the friction existed, it disappeared overnight. And that's the Jewish spirit. Now we're seeing what Jews are really all about.
Rabbi Friedman, regardless, when we think back at this year, there are so many tremendous people that have left. I'm talking about right now the Jewish community. We lost a lot of tremendous rabbis to COVID. And here during this tragedy, we lost a lot of students to this tragedy, the young ones. It seems like the best ones are disappearing. Just like before, we're mourning this period because Rabbi Akiva's students were dying during the same period of time. So it's students and students. I mean, how do we treat this? I don't know if it's from the Torah, but it's definitely in the Bible. I heard preachers say this, that before redemption, the living are going to envy the dead. So this is a little bit of a scary thought. Is that something we believe in, or is it Jewish people, or is it something, is there a prophecy like that?
The living will envy the dead?
Yeah.
A very long time ago, the wisest man, King Solomon, said, "I envy the dead who have already died." It's an old story. It has nothing to do with Mashiach. And what he meant was, at least one aspect of it, when a person is alive, his own children may not take him seriously. But when he dies, all of a sudden, they're concerned with what their father would have wanted, what their father stood for, what his life was all about. And in that sense, King Solomon said, I get more respect from my children after I pass away than while I'm alive. That doesn't mean we envy them because we want to be them. We don't want to. That is not the idea at all. So here's another thing to consider. And again, it should not be mistaken as trying to justify the death or to even ease it. I want to talk only about the context, the setting, where it happened and when it happened. Typically, this kind of an event brings more questions and more frustration than if, God forbid, 45 people died in an airplane accident. If 45 people died in an airplane accident, the focus usually is, who was the pilot? Why did this happen? What was the malfunction? Who is responsible for this, right? But when it happens, like the event on Lag BaOmer, the question seems to be much bigger. In such a place, on such a day, people doing something so holy? That seems to add to the objection, to the horror of it. But let's consider that for a moment. The way a person passes away, the context in which it happens, the setting, who was there, what was going on, is so significant to the person passing away. Every detail, maybe in some way even more significant than the first moments of life, where every detail is significant. In fact, we don't take it seriously enough. When a baby is born, you have to treat the baby with absolute sensitivity, because every experience, every sound, every feeling, everything will affect the child for the rest of his life. So if there's confusion and panic because the child isn't breathing properly, that fear and that panic becomes the child's first experience of life. And it can color the rest of his life. He'll always be afraid. He'll always be nervous. He'll always be frightened. We've got to take these things seriously. Even comments about the child, you got to be careful what you say. Because every detail in the first moments of life are magnified. Same is true at the end of life. Every detail is eternally significant. It's going to be with the soul forever. So there are circumstances that are preferable, and there are certain circumstances that you hope never happens to anybody. The moment of death. A person traveling abroad, he's in a foreign country, doesn't really speak the language, and he passes away. Nobody knows who this is. Nobody cares. Who knows what's going to happen to the body? It's not a good arrangement. Passing away in your own bed, surrounded by your family, 99 and a half years old, much better. Infinitely better. So, instead of being horrified by the fact that 45 young Jews died on Lag BaOmer in Meron celebrating Rab Shimon Bar Yochai's yahrzeit, instead of being horrified, we should wonder, what did those people do to deserve this much more desirable setting for the last moments of their life? We're told that when we get to heaven, the first question that is asked is, where are you coming from? What were you doing? It can be embarrassing. I can think of a number of situations where I'd really rather not say, can we skip this question? But if you can come back to heaven and they ask you, what were you doing? Where are you coming from? And you say, I was at Meron. It was Lag BaOmer. I was celebrating with 100,000 other Jews. Not so shabby. What did they do to deserve that the last moments of their lives should be so meaningful and significant? So don't be horrified that it happened on a holy day. Be a little jealous. How do you arrange that? Because nobody died for being there. Nobody died because they were there. Their death was not a punishment for participating in the celebration. That's ridiculous. They died because, like everybody else, their time came. Everybody dies when their time comes. The question is, where are you when the time comes? It can be negative, it can be very positive. So let's not confuse the setting with the death itself. So when a person says, how could this happen on a holy day? What are you saying? They died because of the holiness? The holiness worked against them? Of course not. Special people, we're told, really holy people pass away on Shabbos. God loved David, King David HaMelech. He loved him so much that he kept him in this world a few hours more, so that he passed away late Shabbos afternoon. But he didn't die because it's Shabbos. Holy people die on a holy day.
Rabbi Friedman, I was actually listening to an interview with someone who was there, and the sequence of events was that first everybody said Shema together, which is around 100,000 people. Then they lit bonfires, and then unfortunately after that, the tragedy took place. I keep on thinking that there are so many numbers that have to do with that day. I mean, and the number 3 is the number that comes up more so than ever. I mean, we're 3,333 years since we received the Torah. This happened on the 33rd Omer. I'll throw in that it was on the 18th of Iyar, which is 18 high, stands for life. So I don't know. Is that all a coincidence? We don't believe in coincidences. What can it possibly be that there are so many 3s in this formula on that day?
It's all good. Exactly what it means, I don't know. But consider another thing. Anyone who died on Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's anniversary of his passing, in his place, celebrating this anniversary, there's no question that Reb Shimon takes personal responsibility for those 45 souls. He was there to greet them. This is his event. He's in charge, and he's responsible. So I'm sure he was right there to greet those souls, to include them in his significant day. In fact, my suspicion is, why these 45? 100,000 people, these 45 are the ones. I was speaking to a young woman who was right there. She was right there, pressed against a fence, a chain link fence. If the chain link fence had fallen, she would be among the trampled. So she was right there, but she did not die. Only those 45, almost hand-chosen, as you were saying. I know at least one of them. His name was Shimon, and he was born around the time of Lag BaOmer, and he was named after Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. I have a suspicion that every one of those 45 have some kind of special relationship with Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Some soul relationship, some connection. This is not random. But it shouldn't sound like we're trying to get over the pain. The good signs, the good things, yeah, it's all very nice. But death is still horrendous. And it gets worse with every passing day. Because death is supposed to end already. It's only meant to be temporary.
Rabbi Friedman, if we can find holiness in this tragedy, what about all the deaths that were due to COVID, to very righteous people throughout the year? What kind of holiness can we find there?
Actually, it's not even over yet. Part of the tragedy in Meron is that all of those people who were buried, their family, if they were from out of the country, could not be there with them. They did not allow any family to come into Israel. So it's the same as the COVID victims whose family couldn't visit them in the hospital. Anyone who dies from a plague, all their sins are erased automatically and they go straight to heaven. Why? Because they died alone. And that's enough punishment for any kind of sin. And so it's all erased and you go straight to heaven. That's an ancient teaching, and of course it's still true today. So everyone who passed away from COVID went straight to heaven. And that means that when the resurrection happens, they will be the first. They are most eligible for coming back to life, because they don't have to go through any kind of cleansing, for any kind of erasing of sin or blemish. That already happened just in their dying. So now they're ready to come back. And we have to think about that. And we have to talk about it and tell our children. The dead are coming. They're going to return. The bodies will be resurrected. It's all going to happen. Life is forever. Death is temporary. It's important. So the tragedy of people dying is getting worse, not better. It doesn't make any sense for people to die now. It shouldn't be necessary. So it's not any less painful or any less tragic. Even though we understand the circumstances were pretty good. When death does happen, it should happen in such holy context. But death shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen to anybody.
Rabbi Friedman, Jewish people, of course, religious Jewish people, observant Jewish people, believe that everything that God does is for the good. However, what kind of message do you think the rest of the world is going to get from this? When we were coming out of Egypt, Moshe was very adamant with God not to destroy the Jewish people, because that would send a very, very bad message to the world. What kind of message do you think the world is getting from this?
Take a look at the reaction. Unless you're talking about a die-hard anti-Semite, the world is very impressed with how Jews handle their own tragedies. There's no rioting, there's no screaming, there's no blaming, there's no looking for revenge. There's faith and there's singing and people coming together. Look at it. It's magnificent. And the world notices. I think you have to be really demented to take pleasure in the fact that Jews suffered a tragedy. And those people who do, they don't count. We shouldn't even consider what they think or what they feel or what they say. They're irrelevant. The world, meaning the normal world, the decent world, is very impressed. I think in some way after the Holocaust, many thoughtful people, the non-Jewish world, many thoughtful people were surprised, puzzled, and impressed because Jews were very outspoken about the tragedy. You know, they were determined not to let people forget, not to let people deny. So there was a lot of talk about what happened and the horrors. And amazingly, nowhere in all that talk was there even a mention or a suggestion of revenge. That is unique. After such an event, would there not be, in most countries and for most people, would there not be a need and a desire and a demand for revenge? There wasn't. Nothing. There's something special about the chosen people. There's no denying it.
Rabbi Friedman, actually, what you're saying right now is something that I could not sleep over from Tuesday to Wednesday. I was actually thinking last week exactly what you're saying, that no one was truly punished for Holocaust and no one really repented for it. And if we look now, the same companies that were involved, I'm talking about big companies, like corporations who were involved and benefited then, they're still around and thriving now. And actually, that's something that started to bother me a lot. It's a funny thing you mentioned it.
Okay, now we want some revenge. We waited patiently, now we want our revenge. Actually, did Germany get punished? Pretty severely. Berlin was wiped out. Not enough punishment? I don't know. I don't know how to judge that. But the immediate response, like in all the television shows, you know, somebody gets murdered, and the nicest and best thing you can say to the family is, we'll find that guy and we will kill him. That's it? That's comforting? Yeah, we're going to go look for him. We're going to find him. I promise you, I will not let him get away with it. That's not what people need to hear. So, if you're asking what is the world seeing in this event on Lag BaOmer, the world is seeing an incredible humane model of the nobility of spirit. Look at the videos. What are you seeing? What are people doing in Israel? They're gathering at the Kotel and they're singing songs of faith and they're comforting each other and they're pledging to be better, to do better, to be more sensitive, to be more caring. Now, that's how you treat a tragedy. It's a light to the nations. I hope that they appreciate the message and the lesson.
Wow, Rabbi Friedman, the perspective you just gave is absolutely amazing. Everything that was happening in my head and everything that I was talking about with people who are just as hurt, just as concerned, trying to figure this out, somehow make sense of it, didn't see it in this perspective, that actually, yeah, tragedy happened and it was handled with dignity, which is something that's not happening in the world right now.
I think in many places, in many countries, they would expect rioting. Blaming the government, blaming the police, blaming the organizers, demanding. Nobody's doing that. Maybe behind the scenes, but that is not the national response. The Prime Minister declared a day of mourning for all Israelis, not segregating the Orthodox from the non-Orthodox. And this is a national unifying tragedy that the world is noticing and should really appreciate. There is something about the chosen people. Stop denying it. Unfortunately, it comes out during a tragedy. It should be this way without tragedy.
Amen.
This is the right way. Don't need a tragedy to bring it out. But it is beautiful. Go online. See what's happening in Israel as a result of this tragedy. It is inspiring. It's godliness.
Rabbi Friedman, thank you for allowing us to see godliness in something that, I don't know, I didn't see it until we just spoke. So I hope that very many people who are gonna see this video will benefit and will get the light and inspiration which you bring to us on weekly basis and to the rest of the world on daily and hourly basis. Rabbi Friedman, thank you so much. Thank you for this program.
So here is our prayer right now. The Jewish response, the people's response, is magnificent. Reaffirming our faith that God knows what he's doing and that there is a rhyme and reason for all that's happening. So our prayer should be like this. Seeing how good the Jewish people are to God, God should respond and be as good to us as we are to him.
Amen.
A nice prayer, no?
Very, very nice. Well, hopefully everyone who watches this video, heard us on the radio today, we'll have this, we'll internalize this message, and hopefully that message is going to become a reality.
Amen.
Rabbi Friedman, thank you so much for another amazing week with us. Thank you.